Isn't it amazing how they can, just drag and drop trillions of dollars into, into these institutions? I mean, just pump in,
It
pump in,
is.
pump in.
It is. And I think actually there's a really important philosophical understanding point there, which is that that's what money is, right? Like that's what dollars are. That's what bank deposits are. It's entries in ledgers. I mean, there's also, to be sure, there's greenbacks, right? There's the dollar bills that are still like hard cash that still is available to be used. And there's, I don't know, there's a couple trillion of that floating around. I think 2.5 to 3 trillion of that. But for the most part, like the money that you think about, your banking deposits, it's just entries and ledgers.
And that's why, you hear these things about a cashless society because it's more easy to control, right? When it's all just, you track everything, via computer, right? Every transaction versus loose cash that's running around. But yeah, just I'm kind of going off on track here for a second, but it's amazing to me how you can just literally drag and drop money, like just move it, move it, move it.
Uh, it is, and COVID is a really good example of just how fast a policy response can come, right? Um, you can, yeah.
Do you think it was a faster response than 2008?
Uh, I mean, it was more, yeah. I mean, yes, it was by volume more, and kind of all at once. And then when you take the stimulus checks that went out to put, money in folks' pockets, yeah, I think it probably was a faster response than 2008. I think to a degree, it was probably driven by the memories of 2008.
Yeah, that was such a crazy period where and people that are in their mid 20s. I mean, I'm 47 now, and people that were in their mid 20s or early 30s, they don't really understand how insane that period was, and how, if the Fed wouldn't have intervened, you know, what would be left of our financial institutions today?
So it's interesting. I take a somewhat different, opinion on this. The players, the owners of those institutions would be different, and there would have been a lot of short-term disruption, and there would have been a lot of legal fallout. The court systems, the bankruptcy courts, would have been just completely drowned. But end of the day, they would have been those institutions would rebuild, and that the wealth that was there was just going to be redistributed. It wasn't going to be destroyed. It was like the real wealth of the world wasn't getting destroyed in 2008. It was just on the verge of having a kind of a very acute redistribution, as things that people previously thought had value didn't. But that's just a redistribution. So I don't think it would be in shambles today. It would just be different. And to be sure, there would have been a lot of short-term disruption. And by short-term, I mean like 3, 4, 5 years of disruption post that, which may very well have impacted projects' ability to get done, things that actually do impact real world wealth, like building factories or developing technology or whatever. But yeah, that's how I look at it.
Well, and I mean, I agree with you. I just curious of like, what the fallout would have been if these institutions would have melted down, and would you think we'd be in a better place today if that would have happened and the Fed wouldn't have stepped in?
Uh, yeah, I'm actually of that opinion, but I'm not certain that that's true. But I am sort of that opinion. I mean, I think that if you put yourself into a position where you can become or where you are insolvent, that you should be allowed to fail. Like you should. That's the consequences of it. And yeah, I think that bankruptcy should have come in back then, but it didn't. I mean, it is what it is. Well, except for Lehman. It happened for Lehman.
Well, and Bear Stearns too, right? Bear Stearns filed
Yeah,
bankruptcy. Yeah.
well, didn't they get, I don't think they went bankrupt. They got forced into didn't they get forced bought by,
Chase
I don't
maybe.
recall.
Yeah. Washington Mutual they got acquired by
Yeah,
somebody.
by Chase,
Chase.
Washington. Yeah,
Wachovia, I think, was Wells Fargo.
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, well, and also, you look at that time period as well. I mean, I had just moved to Phoenix, and like Phoenix and the Vegas markets, you had homes that sold for 500,000, and they were short selling for 220,000.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a dramatic fall in housing for sure. I mean, it was a dramatic rise in housing earlier in the decade, so to a degree, it was correcting for that. But it was because I worked in mortgage technology from 2007. I mean, in by mortgage technology, I worked for the company most people probably know as Black Knight. They're ICE now. They were LPS back in the day. They processed like 70% of the country's mortgages, and they had a commanding position in the default management servicing technology. So we had lots and lots of big clients and default servicing in 2010, 2011, to a lesser degree, 2009, because it takes a little while for it to really hit. But those were just insane years because the volume of foreclosures was just immense, and the loss mitigation efforts was just immense. And we were providing technology for them. So I spent a lot of late nights and weekends trying to get systems up and running quickly in order to help our clients deal with just completely unprecedented volumes for them.
So were you surprised when you saw this starting to occur?
When I saw this starting to occur, when that
Of the crash of '08 and
I was I mean, I didn't really understand the financial system at the time. So I don't know if I was surprised or not. I mean, I felt like, yeah, the housing market is due because it went from where it was in like the late 90s up to where it was in 2008. And that's like, this has got to be a bubble. I didn't see what was going on like say Michael Burry did back in the day. I just wasn't looking in those places. I wasn't even thinking to look forward. I was just at that time, trying to build mortgage technology systems. Um, the so I don't know that I was. I mean, I think everybody was sort of surprised at the depths to which we sank or the heights to which we rose in terms of default volume. I mean, definitely, because I worked with folks who were at the time maybe 50 years old and had been in the mortgage industry their whole career, and they were like, oh my gosh, like this is completely unprecedented.
well, and it's so funny when you go back and rewatch The Big Short, especially that scene with Steve Carell, getting the dance from the stripper, and she's talking about her 5 houses and a condo, and but it's now I never met any strippers out here, in that scenario, but I met a lot of people that had 2, 3 houses and a condo. There was always a condo with people out here, and and being like, I was just so taken back of like, God, I don't belong here. Like, people here have real estate, and they're buying another property and another property and another property, and all of a sudden it just froze and collapsed. It was bound to happen because it wasn't reality.
No, it wasn't. Like the housing prices were not reflective of kind of their underlying value to to society. And I mean like that can be said for many assets, right? Like their value exceeds what their like utility value, and there's measures of speculation in there. There's inflation driven aspects that drive the value of assets. But I mean, it was clear, or at least it seemed to me, as somebody like you in my late 20s, in the late 20s, early 30s, when the GFC was unfolding, that yeah, housing was due for a correction. What I didn't understand or appreciate was exactly like all the things that were driving it, particularly with mortgage-backed securities, and the role that played, in kind of creating a demand to buy mortgages that really just push, because you create that demand and you basically kind of wink wink nudge nudge tell the lenders, we don't care about the credit quality, just get us, then you have what happened.
And then everybody wanted to participate in the party, right? Like
Yeah.
appraisers had to get they had to get the values at a certain target. Uh, I don't know of anybody that did this, but I'm going to assume people had to hit certain numbers, certain thresholds, so they could keep working. And mortgage brokers, real estate
Oh, yeah.
agents, appraisers.
Well, and a lot of those, their compensation is volume driven to a degree as well. Like if you're an independent appraiser, you get paid by the appraisal, right? So you want to do as many as you can, and you don't want to alienate your clients by bringing in light appraisals, which threaten closing's ability to get done. If you're, but yeah, there was a lot of incentive to get deals done, both to keep your job and as well as just make more money.
So fast forward to where we're at now, because you've been talking about a housing market crash that people aren't prepared for. Where does what we went back in time for a few minutes, that period, and where we're at now, is there a comparison? And if so, what is it?
So yes, there is, and no, there isn't at the same time. And I just want to be clear. I'm actually not necessarily calling for a housing market crash. When you, it's kind of like when you write the story, you don't write the headline, right? Like the it I do like there is significant stress in the FHA portfolio that we kind of talked about the cause the last time I was on, and that is just beginning now to start to play out as the loss mitigation procedures have changed, and that is definitely going to cause a significant jump in the supply from foreclosures slash forced selling for borrowers that are in distress, for FHA borrowers that are in distress. And that supply is going to come onto the market over the next 12 to 18 months as those individual loans and default stories play out. Um, and and there's also some stress in the VA portfolio, though it's not huge. But there's very little stress in Fannie and Freddie's portfolio. So there's not a lot of delinquency there yet. We might get there, right? Like, and I think if like say Melody were on this program with me, she makes an argument for why that's going to happen, and I do not dismiss her argument. It may very well. But at least right now, like that's where we're at. Like, but the canary in the coal mine, FHA, there's definitely some very significant stress in that portfolio that's starting to play out. So I'm not sure whether or not this leads to a housing market crash. It definitely will lead to home value declines, in particularly continued home value declines in particular areas, because the FHAs that are most vulnerable to this distress have a tendency to cluster in particular markets in particular areas. And if you start getting a bunch of forced selling and foreclosures that all happen in a particular area, then you're going to get a magnified effect on what that's going to do to the home prices in that particular locale. So that is kind of generally what I see. And I think so to go back to what are comparisons, or like what's different between now and uh, what's different between now and 2008. Um, the first one is in 2008, the mortgage-backed securities that were held by banks and other financial institutions, those mortgage-backed securities bore credit risk. So if there was default in the underlying mortgages, you could take a loss and not get your principal back as a mortgage-backed securities investor back in those days. Nowadays, so long as you're investing in Fannie Freddie or Ginnie Mae, which is FHA, VA, USDA, et cetera, then there's no risk. There's no credit risk to you because the government explicitly insures you in the case of FHA, VA, and when it comes to the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mae, it's effectively explicit now because of the conservatorship. Um, but if they go out of conservatorship, I don't know, like they said, oh, well, this guarantee was implicit, and the government indeed made good on it, or turned that implicit into an explicit guarantee back in back in 2007, 8, whenever it was that they put Fannie and Freddie into conservatorship. But they had to do that because there was credit risk in these mortgage-backed securities, and there was the risk, the concern that if that credit risk was borne by the MBS investors, who were, and we're just talking vanilla MBS investors, somebody who buys a mortgage-backed security but isn't buying like a tranche of a collateralized mortgage obligation, which pays out, or is the first to bear loss or the second to bear loss. We're not even talking anything exotic, but if those things would start to go through to financial institutions, that financial institutions would be insolvent, and you would have this, and when I say bigger colossal mess to clean up, that's the 4 or 5 years of bankruptcy courts being completely flooded with all sorts of corporate bankruptcies and trying to sort all that out. Um, so that's the primary difference between 2008 and now. I mean, I think the similarities, look, you saw a huge run up in the housing market prior to 2008. You see the same thing that's happened now. You see credit standards with respect to the lowest end of the borrowers being uh, those have kind of expanded some, although maybe not in aggregate. I mean, certainly they have in the FHA space since 2008. The credit situation, or the qualifying characteristics of the borrowers at origination are worse now than they were back then. But then there's a lot of like the subprime that used to be done privately is not, that's effectively shifted over to the FHA. There's not really a market beneath FHA that I'm aware of in any event. Nothing in size to get mortgages outside of that if you're a less qualified borrower, like lower credit score, higher debt to income ratios. So yeah, there are similarities, but I think that difference of who bears the credit risk of the mortgage-backed securities ultimately limits the impact of what of how this will play out in terms of like the government's policy response, like, oh, well, we have to go, buy large amounts of assets um, in order to help establish a market for an asset that like wasn't trading at the time because nobody knew how bad the credit quality was underneath it. Or then eventually, to try to stimulate the economy with the interest rates at zero, like they did later on.